Okay, let's continue on with our code. As I mentioned before, we are going to create a list of items. For that, let's switch to this activity all books layout. Before all of those, let's delete this text view in here. Also, let's delete this background color and let's add some paddings as well. For example, 25 dp. In here, I'm going to create a list view as we created many times before, match parent and match parent for the width and height, and also an ID. Let's call it list view. That seems about fine. Let's switch to our Java code, this all books activity class. Up until now, we have used things like toast messages for demonstrating the changes in our application. For example, when we clicked on something, we have showed that we are clicking on some button. Or in Java session, we have used things like system.out.println. But there is something more professional in Android that we can use called a log. Let's type and we'll talk about it. Basically, we need to define a final string in here called tag. And if you notice, I typed it by typing log t and pressing tab or enter. It will generate this tag for me. You can define a simple text in here. And wherever you want to use this log, you can say, for example, in this on create, you can type log d, and by pressing tab or enter, you can type whatever you want. For example, let's say started. Now if we run our application, if we click on this see all books, we know for sure that this line of code will execute because this on create will be executed whenever we create our activity, and by clicking on this button in here, we know that we are creating and showing another activity. Now if we want to follow this line of code, we can come to this logcat window in here, and as you probably see, there are a lot of things happening in here. First, we need to determine the device that we are using or we are running our applications on. For that, I'm going to choose this emulator. From here, I connected my real device as well, but I'm running my application on this emulator. Then in here, once again, I need to choose the name of my application, which is org.makebot.my library. In here, I can search for the text. For example, let's search for onCreate. And as you can see in here, this piece of code onCreate started is mm, being printed in here, and this is exactly this message inside this log message. Basically, these log messages won't be compiled when you compile your application for the production, but for debugging, you can use them and you can see these logs in your logcat window. There are other types of logs as well. For example, log E, we have it will catch and show the details of some errors, as this E stands for. But mostly we are going to use this log D, so if needed, I will explain other logs in their place. But mostly you will work with this log D in your projects. Okay, let's continue on. Let's define the list view that we just created. List view, list view. Once again, inside this one create method, list view is equal to, we'll cast it to list view, find view by id, r.id dot books list view. Then we need to define an array list of strings and the adapter for the list view. For that, let's simply type array list of type string, let's say books is equal to new array list. In here, I'm going to add some books. For example, 1Q84, This is a book of Murakami, books.add. Another one, Macbeth from Shakespeare, or let's say books.add and the Iliad by Homer. Okay, and now let's create our adapter. For that, I'm going to simply create an array adapter of type string once again. Adapter is equal to new array adapter. We have done all of this before, so I'm not going to explain much. In here, we need to pass things like a context, which is this activity once again. We need to pass our layout, android.r.layout dot simple list item 1, and we need to pass our books array list. Next, we need to set the adapter to our list view. List view dot set adapter, and we'll pass our adapter. Now, if we run our program, if I click on this see all books, I can see a simple list of items, simple list of books that I just added in here. But I don't want to see only the name of my books. For example, I want to see the image or author maybe as well. Also, I want my list of items, my list of books to seem a little bit beautiful. For that, I can create my customized array adapter and then pass it the customized layout, then pass it to the list view. But that seems like a lot of work, and also there is much more flexibility to recycler view instead of list view, and also much more efficiency. We will talk about flexibility in designing the recycler view and working with that, but about the efficiency, we won't see the difference between the efficiency in this simple list of items because there are so few of them. But for example, if you have a list of items for 1 million books, for example, then it will be much clearer. Basically, every time we see our list view, we can see only a limited amount of items on the screen of our list view. And for example, if you have a huge list, we can scroll, and by scrolling the list view, the adapter in the list view needs to pass data to the list view to be shown to the user. That is much more efficient in recycler view. Okay, that's enough. Let's implement that recycler view that I was talking so far. For that, let's shut down the emulator for now. Now let's continue on. Before I create the recycler view that I was just talking about, I need to implement some libraries in my code. I can do that in this activity all books. If we switch in the design view, you can see that there is something called recycler view, but this icon in here means that we need to download it or implement it in our project. Let's click on it. It will pop up the message, and do you want to add the project dependency in here? Yes, I want to. Let's click on OK. Make sure to have a solid internet connection because it's going to download something to your project. But as you can see in here, we are getting some errors. Let's click on this affected modules. This is the Gradle file that I talked about in the earlier videos of this course. We said that every Android application has some activities, have some Java classes and layouts. Also, these and also the files, for example, sounds and images and all of them, and also the other projects that are implementing into our project are being connected together via this Gradle file. And if we want to locate this Gradle file in our project, we can see that it's here, Gradle scripts. There are some scripts to it, but mostly we are going to work with these first two files. Right now we are in this module app one, build.gradle module app. Also there is another one, build.gradle project. For now, let's talk about this module app. Basically, in here you can see general features of your application. For example, the compile SDK version. In here it's 28, which is the latest one. The minimum SDK version, which we defined when we created our project, it's 19 right now. We can change it from here. We have a version name in here as well. For example, when we update our application, we can increase this one in here. There are a lot of other features in here. We are not going to talk about these. These are basically in another language called Gradle and are implementing and give our application some features. But the one that we are going to work about is this recycler view in dependencies. Inside this dependency, basically you can add uh, different libraries in your application. Library, as I mentioned before, is a piece of code that somebody else has wrote and you can use it in your project. And you can use it by saying this implementation keyword, then the address of that project on the internet. For example, in here I can see that the address of this recycler view is this piece of line in here. Every time we change this Gradle file, we will see something called sync now, some pop-up message in here that will say sync your project. But right now we are getting some errors because we hadn't have a successfully synced project. We are getting some errors. We can try it again, but we will get the same error. The reason that I'm getting this error is because this recycler view, this 28 version of the recycler view is not completed yet. It has some errors and it can't be successfully implemented to my project. For that, I can change this 28 version to something lower. For example, let's say 27.1.1. You can search for the different versions of the recycler view in the internet. For example, we can search recycler view dependency. The first link is probably the link that we need. It's the Android developers official website, and if you scroll down a little bit, we can see the text that we need to copy into our Gradle file to implement the recycler view. You can also search for different versions on the internet, but right now we are getting some other errors because we are using a lower level than this SDK version in here. If we want to use the 27 version in our application, we need to change this compile SDK version to 27 as well. But the target SDK should be to 27 as well, and also all the other libraries that you implemented in your application. This RC02 is different versions of the libraries. For example, they can be in alpha or beta processes. For now, I'm just going to simply change this one to 27.1.1 as well. Now, if we try to sync our project, make sure to have a solid internet connection because it's going to download some libraries to your application. Seems like we have a successfully built project. Okay, let's move on. Now I have the ability to use recycler view in my projects. Let's switch to text view once again. Let's delete this list view. We can define a recycler view by typing uh, android.support.v7.widget.recycler view by importing that. Match parent and match parent as before. Let's give it an ID and let's move on. Let's say books recycler view. Okay, we need to define this recycler view in our Java code as well. But as you can see in here, we are getting some errors because we just deleted the list view. Let's delete all of these and let's define our recycler view in here. For that, I'm going to say private recycler view. I'm going to call it books recycler view. In here, our books recycler view is equal to, let's cast it like any other elements in the user interface. r.id.books recycler. Similar to list view, if we want our recycler view to populate some list of items, we need to create an adapter. For list views, we had the option to use some pre-built adapter, for example, the array adapter class that we created. But for recycler view, you need to create your own adapter. And that's because the recycler view creation is a little bit more complex. In order to create our recycler view adapter, the first thing that we need to do is to create a simple layout file for every item that we are going to show in the recycler view. Let's create one and we will understand what I'm talking about. In this layout file, I'm going to right click and create a new layout resource file. I'm going to call it list item book res view. Once again, I'm going to change this one to relative layout. In here, I'm going to simply create an image view for the image of every book. Let's give it 140 dp as the width and 140 dp as the height. Okay, also an ID. Let's call it book image, and also a text view for the book name. ID, book name, and text. For example, let's say book name. We are going to change this text and this image as well, but these are just placeholders. For now, if we don't have any item to show in here, we are using this simple text. Let's move it below our image view, book image, sorry, and let's center it horizontally. Center horizontal to true. Also, let's change the width and height of our relative layout to wrap content as well. Okay, in here, I'm going to give it some margin top as well. Margin top of 5 dp for example, or 7 dp for example, and let's make it bigger. Size to 16 display. Let's give our layout some paddings as well. Padding 5, I guess, is fine. Okay, this is the layout for every item in our recycler view item list. Let's move on. For creating an adapter for recycler view, the next thing that we need to do is to create a Java class called our recycler view adapter. Let's say books recycler view adapter. This would be our recycler view adapter. In here, let's first create a log message for debugging purposes. If you remember from Java sessions, we have defined inner classes. I need to define an inner class in here. I'm going to type it and then we'll explain what it is. Public class. I'm going to call it view holder. It will extend the recycler view dot view holder, but I'm getting some errors. I need to implement the constructor. Let's create two fields and we'll talk about it. Private image view, book image, and also private text view, our book name. Also, this one should be initialized in the constructor of our class. Let's say book image is equal to, let's cast it to image view as we initialized any other UI elements. When we were in an activity, for example, we could type something like find view by ID and then pass the ID of that item and we had access to that item. But we are not in an activity and this find method, find view by ID is not available for us. But we have this view in here that we are getting from this constructor. I can say item view dot find view by ID. Now I can pass the ID of that specific element, for example, book image. This find view by ID was an inner method in this activity or every other activity. We couldn't access it from here because we are not in an activity, we are in just a simple Java class. We need to access it via this item view. Similarly, we can initialize our text view. Book name is equal to text view item view dot find view by ID r dot id dot book name. Okay, what is this inner class that we are creating? Basically, this view holder class is responsible for creating every instance of our elements in the recycler view. For example, whenever our recycler view adapter is creating some object, that will create some instance of this class, this view holder class, and then we'll show it to the user. We are defining some fields in here which are exactly the field that we just created in this list item layout. A book name and a book image in here. We are defining them in here as well. We are not going to do anything else in here, and this is probably the same every time that you are creating your viewholder class. And it's important to extend the recycler view.viewholder. The other way it won't work. The next thing that I need to do is to extend the recycler view dot adapter, and inside this diamond I need to pass the view holder I just created. For that I can simply type view holder, and as you can see in these parentheses, it will refer to this inner class that I just created. But I'm getting some warnings because I need to implement some methods. If I hover over it, it says that I need to implement some abstract methods. Okay, for implementing I can press Ctrl I, and these are the necessary methods. Basically every method that has not the completed icon in here needs to be implemented in order to resolve this error. Okay, I'm going to implement all of them. Now we are not getting any errors, but there are much more to do in order to create our customized recycler view adapter. For that, I'm going to pause the video in here and we'll continue on with the making recycler view adapter in the next video. See you in the next video.